Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Wadster Deep Dives. Today, the variable I'm looking into is how I perform at different stages of a tournament. Do I perform better at the start of the event when there might be less information for the bookies to work with, or do I perform better after I've watched some tennis towards the middle and latter stages of an event? So to conduct this analysis, I split the kind of data into three different variables. All of them have turned out around equal in terms of points staked, or not too far from each other, luckily. And so for this, did the first variable was round one, or the first time I've seen a player for the week. So if a player's got a bye through the first round, for example, and I haven't seen them play, I'd include them in that round one, even if it might be the second round of the tournament. Or there are certain matches where there wouldn't be TV analysis, and I would include them in there as well. And then the second time viewing the player, so that would be once I've seen both players perform once, and to at least I've been watching it for a good amount of time to get a bit of a read into the players from that event itself. And then the third time viewing the player onwards. So that's usually, if you look at it from a tournament perspective, I'd say from the round of 16 onwards, like the Grand Slams, you've had 3 rounds of play already, so I factor that in quicker. Whereas for ATP 250, where there's only 5 rounds, I'll be recording that statistic from the kind of, the semi-finals onwards sort of thing. So yeah, I broke it down, and it's pretty remarkable just how strong the correlation is between my results towards the end of the week and towards the start of the week. So quite remarkably, despite having an overall ROI of about 8% on all the bets, I'm actually running at an ROI of minus 4.3%, or minus 29 points on or minus 30 points basically on bets where it's the first round or the first time I've seen the player at the event. A perfect example of a bet that I got wrong recently, which is a general theme. Like when I was going through the bets yesterday and going through each round, and after I'd segmented them, I was noticing certain things, and a lot of it related to how I was perceiving players before they'd played. I was often getting it completely wrong in terms of the assumptions I was making. And Evans versus Rusevary yesterday is probably a really good example to use for a bet where I hadn't seen either of them play in the conditions. I assumed that Evans in the wind would be more adaptable, and that he would be able to kind of sort of wear Rusevary down and make errors. But it was very evident early on into the match that Rusevary was just the one striking better, had more power, and was dictating the play. And I honestly look back at the results, and I think there's many examples of ones like that where I've just not got the read right, in a sense. Betting on round one and just making some assumptions that weren't correct in a sense. Whereas when the event is starting to get into full swing, you can see how radically the results have shifted, both categories of even the second time. Just if I've made sure to view the players once, the ROI's jumped up to 11.73%. And then obviously for the latter stages, an ROI of 15.5%. Like, this is great news in my opinion. This is just what I want to see, because what's great with data is if you can really kind of find areas of what strength or weakness that you're easily able to kind of adapt to. So what we can see here is the fact that the ROI has been very strong on the second from when I've been viewing the players, and have a better read of the conditions as such, because it goes hand in hand. I'm not only getting a better understanding of how the players are looking, but it's also how the courts are looking, and I feel like those two factors are probably two of the ones where I'm really excel in tennis betting, is knowing how certain players are going to react to certain courts once I've seen them playing them. Also things like different courts at different the same event, things like that. So it was my hypothesis that these kind of results might show up, but I had no idea it would be to this extent, where I'd be minus 30 points for the early first rounds. So I'm just going to cover some general thoughts and analysis relating to that, because obviously when you look at that, you could just say, oh, why don't you just cut out all round one bets? And I don't think it's that simple. I think there are times where betting on round one can be very useful. I think yesterday, for example, the Nori bet I feel like that was a good bet, and I feel like the Cerundolo bet was a good one as well. But because those bets were made because I had a good understanding of conditions from day one. I watched Rio on the first day, and even though Nori and Cerundolo were playing in their second round, I had a good idea that they would overpower their opponents from the ground, which is how it turned out. But what I've noticed with the round one bets that have gone well have been that they might be at specific events. I think Indian Wells, I've always done well at Indian Wells in round one, because they have very kind of their conditions are very much suited towards clay court, and then you often get a transition from fast hard courts to Indian Wells, and that creates a lot of value around certain players, and I think I've been good at adjusting to that. And I think certain markets, I think at the start of the season, I don't know if anyone remembers, but the United Cup, I was often targeting unders on players where I expected the favourite to outmatch the underdog. So the next thing for me now is to delve deeper into these round one bets, see where I might be making profit and where I might not be. I do really have a strong feeling that my weakness is probably on the shorter prices when I'm betting favourites, and as literally the Evans one is a good one example, and I think the bet that I made that was sent as a live bet but was a pre-match bet, the one on Masarova at 1.85, they're the perfect example of bets that I'm just making a few too many mistakes on and need to cut out. And yeah, just being able to comb through that data a bit more and seeing that on a bit more of a micro level can help. And it also kind of helps explain why the results in 2020 were better on a general ROI perspective, because if you look at the stat on column G, the proportion of round one in relation to the total stake, I was staking around 28% in 2020 on the early rounds and 30% plus in the last 3 years. So obviously if my strength's in those later rounds, then I'm obviously going to be making more profit, a higher ROI in that. And just look how ridiculous those, just I have to point it out whilst we're looking at 2020, just how ridiculous the stats are for the contrast between ROI in the round one and the second time and third time, seeing the players like we're minus 8 points for round one and plus 56 and plus 27 for the other variables for an ROI of 38%, which shows how well I was tipping generally that year as well. But also when you look at the last 3 years where the results aren't quite as high, the ROI for the matches that aren't round one have still been up at 8.6%. So it's a really significant factor. and something that I can obviously look to adapt with moving forward, because yeah, it's really, but it's that striking that you have to take quite big action with what I've seen. And even this week I've been I think last week as well, I sort of didn't tip much on the Monday and the Tuesday, and just I know now in future that I can just relax on those days, use it as a bit of a scouting report. I have been aware of this for a while, but I don't think I've ever gone into the data side of it on a granular level, so it hasn't been something where I've allowed it to stick in my head, if that makes sense. I haven't been able to justify not taking big action against it, whereas this is certainly the case. So yeah, I can't remember if there's probably some other things that I might want to mention. Yeah, so as I said, it's just about kind of delving into the micro level a little bit more. It's about knowing that with my staking plan, for example, I can sort of stake a bit less in those round one matches where I'm less confident, but might feel like there's enough margin to take a bet. Just really understanding that extra uncertainty with my assumptions that I'm going to be making with these early round bets. And there are times where, you know, I think I also need to look at the odds ranges. For example, I think the higher odds ranges are more likely to be profitable than the shorter price ranges when going through the data. I was noticing that even in round one, there were certain plays. I remember there was one with Rusa against Badosa last year where it was Dubai, and I think I might have seen one day's play, but I hadn't seen Badosa in action. But I did have a strong feeling about the matchup, and Rusa was about 5-1. She won the match in set one, and it was big profit. And I think those are the kind of ideas where if it's early in a tournament, it's okay because you're taking a chance on those bigger price ranges where, you know, there is more wriggle room for those assumptions being wrong. Whereas when you're betting a 1.7 shot at in a round one, you need probability of plus 65%. If you get those assumptions wrong, then you're basically betting minus EV. So yeah, it's something that I really didn't expect to see from this data. I think, as I said, the next thing to do is now to look at the other variables relating to round one, things like surface type as well, because I've got a feeling that round one on clay, I'm looking through the past data, I feel like I can bet round one on clay a bit better than I can bet round one on hard courts, and also indoor hard courts might not be the same. So it's just about investigating this a bit more, and figuring out where the real weaknesses lie, so that I can kind of exclude those bets completely. But really glad to be looking at the data on this kind of level, because it provides so many insights, and it leads to so many places as well as to where I can now develop on these findings, and yeah. I also think it relates to the last thing I studied, the volume analysis. If I'm betting those really high volume days in round one, and you know, making lots of assumptions that are getting wrong, then that's obviously going to lead to some poor results. So yeah, not going to say any more, because yeah, I've covered a lot there. If I have any more thoughts that I might have forgotten, I'll post them on my Twitter. I'll make a thread. But yeah, cheers guys, and